Good morning, all. It's Thursday. Welcome to the Vicarage today, wherever you're watching from. Great to see you today. Thank you for being with us. And today we start a new book. We finished Galatians yesterday, and today we move on to a book called Hebrews. I'm really looking forward. There's some fantastic stuff in Hebrews, and I'm really looking forward to engaging with it and sharing with you the fruits of my thoughts. But let's start with today. Let's give you a bit of background to the book of Hebrews first. Firstly, who wrote it? Truth be told, we don't know. Various theories. It almost certainly wasn't Paul. If you compare it with Galatians, the style is just very, very different. It was very unlikely Paul himself. It could have been written by one of his friends, Luke perhaps, or Apollos, one of these other people. It's much more Lucan style. It just isn't really Paul at all. It also mentions Timothy at the end, who's just been released from prison. There's likely to be some sort of connection with Paul, but in truth, reality, we don't know. Who was it written to? Well, we don't know that either. It wasn't given the name letter to the Hebrews until the end of the 2nd century, so that doesn't really help us very much. There have been various thoughts. Could it have been to the Roman church? It's been suggested it could have been sent to the church in Jerusalem. It could have been sent to the church in Spain. We really don't know. Truth be told, we're pretty clueless on that one too. Finally, when was it? Likewise, I'm not really forthcoming with this one either. Well, we know it was certainly written before 93 AD because a guy called Clement in Rome refers to it, so it was certainly before that. There's some thought it could have been before this temple was sacked in 70 AD in Jerusalem because it talks about ongoing sacrifices. On the other hand, it could have been sent to someone just after, because it could have been the fact the temple's being crushed down, that the worship of God still goes on. So there are various things. Again, likewise, we really don't know. So who wrote it? We don't know. Who wrote it to? We don't know. When was it? We don't know much either. But anyway, there's a few thoughts to be going on. I guess we'll discover things as we go on. But anyway, it's a fantastic book, and let's get stuck into it now. So without further ado, Hebrews chapter 1. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he has also created all the worlds. He is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being, and he sustains all things by his powerful word. When he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, "I'll be his father, and he will be my son"? And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels winds and his servant flames of fire." But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of your kingdom. You've loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of compassion beyond your companions. And in the beginning, Lord, you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like clothing. Like a cloak, you will roll them up, and like clothing, they'll be changed. But you are the same, and your years will never end. But to which of the angels has he ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? Are not all angels spirits in the divine service, sent out to serve for the sake of those who inherit salvation?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, there's a huge amount in there, as you can imagine. I was talking a bit about the people who he wrote Hebrews to. We don't know entirely who they are, but we do know a couple of things about them. We know that they were clearly struggling. Well, we found out later in the book, we found that they are struggling under persecution, that they're dealing with that. Probably either under Nero or possibly Diocletian. So we know they're struggling under persecution, and they're struggling. We also know they have a huge respect for the Old Testament, and that just goes through and through and through, as you've already found out in this morning's reading. So what does the author of Hebrews say? He starts by saying that throughout the Bible, throughout the earth, and long ago, God spoke through many ways through his prophets. And he spoke through the words of the prophets. He also spoke through some funny things from time to time as well. He spoke through the mouths of donkeys and various other things. But one way or another, God spoke through the prophets. But he says, in recent times, God has done something new. He has spoken to us through his Son. In other words, he's referring to Jesus. So he's saying throughout history, throughout the whole of the Old Testament, the Bible and so on, God has spoken in lots of different ways. But recently, he's done a new thing, and he's spoken through his Son. So God has spoken. The implication is they were kind of slightly incomplete in the past, but now now that Jesus has arrived, perfection has come. So in lots of ways in the Old Testament, God has spoken. But now, recently, the writer of the Hebrews is saying he's spoken through his Son, which we clearly know to be Jesus. And then he goes on in about 3 verses to make some huge claims, but wonderful claims that we can reflect on all about Jesus. So what does he say about Jesus? Firstly, he says he's the heir of all things. He is to inherit everything, right? He's the heir of all things. The world may tell you something rather different, but actually we serve somebody who is the heir of all things. Secondly, he says it was through Jesus that God made everything. In other words, it was through Jesus that the whole world, the universe, if you like, was created. And that's a huge God. Jesus was there at the beginning, and through the Son, everything was created. That's a massive thing he's saying there. Then he goes on to say, he says he's the reflection of God's glory. Now, actually, reflection's not a good translation, actually, because reflection means the light has come from somewhere else and it's being shone from somewhere else. But the word is actually stronger than that. It actually implies the source. So Jesus is the source of God's glory. Because again, that's a pretty huge thing he's saying about Jesus here too. Then he goes on to say that he is the image of the one true God. He's the image of God. You say he's a living image of his dad. Well, you might say that Jesus is the living image of his dad as well. He is the human face of God. If you want to know what God's like, Jesus is the place. Look, Jesus is kind of God-shaped, if you like. But he goes on to say, not only was he there with the creation of the world, the universe, but actually Jesus, through his mighty word, holds all things together. So he didn't just create the world, but in the words of the song, he holds us in his hands as well. He didn't just create us, but he sustains us and keeps us going too. Sixthly, he says, he dealt with purification for sin. Now, he gives lots of stuff later on about how we are the purification from sin, how we can get right with God, and how we can be purified from our sin. And Jesus says here, Jesus dealt with that. He dealt with purification for sin. And finally, he goes on to say that having dealt with purification for sin, he's now seated at the right hand of God the Father. He's in the place of complete honor. So he's made 7 here huge claims on behalf of Jesus. So these people who are struggling in their faith, who know their Old Testament, can look back and they can see that God has done all these amazing things. And Jesus has come, and it's all these incredible things about him. That he's the image of God, and he was there at the creation, and all this type of thing. So we're not just serving something ineffectual and unloving. We're serving Jesus, who is all these things that the letter of the Hebrews says. And then he goes on to say, for the rest of the chapter, he gives a whole series of, there are 7 Old Testament quotes, mostly from the Psalms. I hear Psalm 2 and Psalm 110 just off the top of my head. A whole series of quotes from the Old Testament to prove that angels are great, but actually Jesus the Son is greater. He goes on to say that Jesus, God has angels who are powerful, but the Son of God is so much more powerful. To which of these angels has he ever said, "You're my son, this day have I begotten you"? So the angels are great, but the Son of God is even greater. So in this chapter 1 of Hebrews, as I say, written to these people, we don't entirely know who, we don't have much idea really who was sent to, but except the fact we know that they were struggling under persecution, and we know that they were knowledgeable and respectful of the Old Testament. We hear saying that in the Old Testament, God spoke in many ways, but more recently, he says, he's spoken through his Son. And he makes a whole series of statements about Jesus being the image of God and there at the creation. What a fantastic Jesus that we serve. The Son of God is great. And then he gives 7 Bible quotes to prove that whilst the angels are great, the Son of God is even greater. And that's the Jesus we serve. So know your Bible, and when times get tough, know what a mighty God, what a mighty Saviour we have. More tomorrow.